Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Gio and Joey show. We have a very special guest and friend, Anslem Paul. Did I pronounce that right?
You got it. You got it.
Yeah,
That's it. Anslem Paul. Yep.
yeah. Let me confess here. For many years, I thought you just had your last name first and your first name last. You know how some people put like that, and then I was like, wait a minute. So your last name, and this is off topic, but your last name as Paul is very unique. Usually it's not a last name, it's a first name. What's the story behind that, if you know?
Yeah. Well, I get that a lot, obviously,
Hmm.
and oftentimes people struggle with the Anslem period, whether it's the first or the last name. So
Hmm.
I get everything from Ansel to Hansel to antonym to insulin.
Mercy.
You'd be surprised how many variations of that name. But I don't. There's no real story with the last name
Hmm.
being Paul. I think in certain areas that may be kind of common, I guess.
Hmm.
But the story that I have about the first name or Anselm
Hmm.
is that we studied a guy called Anselm or Saint Anselm. He was an
Hmm.
apologist for the existence of God, I think is what he is best known for. And my father was a pastor, Seventh-day Adventist pastor
Hmm.
as well. And I guess he came across this guy in his studies and he wanted to name me Anselm. Mom
Hmm.
didn't like it. She didn't like because the E and the L were swapped. So mom said,
Hmm.
nobody will ever be able to pronounce Anselm. And so she switched it, and thus we have Anslem. And I'm not sure
Okay.
she was successful in that either, because again, antonym, insulin,
Yeah,
all of
no.
that's there. So anyway, that's
It
that.
it could be
So you
worse.
guys know that mental condition where your brain automatically wants to read a word based on the first and last. So for the longest time, like even after we were friends on Facebook, I just read your name as that Christian guy Anselm because that's
And
the name I knew. And so I thought your name was Anselm. And then one time when I was going to type it out to tell Gio that you were coming on the show, I went to make sure I was spelling the name right. And I'm like, oh, it's not. So yeah, my brain just automatically associated it with Ansel.
yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. Good. It's good too. So look, you wrote an article back in May 8th, and I know it's been a while, but you're the author of it, so we're not going to try to misquote you, right? We got the author here. It was titled "The United States of America," and basically, well, yeah, the American Pope. What about the current Pope caught your attention or made you write the article?
Yeah, so and you guys, we talked a little bit just before we came
Mm-hmm.
on about the podcast that I do called the Pastors Roundtable. We were in a meeting with that crew while the election was going on. So
Okay. Yeah.
so we broke from our meeting and just pulled it up on screen, and we were watching
Mm-hmm.
um, at the time when we saw the
Black
white
smoke, white
smoke,
smoke.
or yeah, the black smoke, yeah, white smoke, and this pope, from what we had read and seen, and not that we were really deep following it,
Mm-hmm.
but there was it was a surprise. Like I wasn't saying here are the three guys and one of them could be this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So to hear for it to be an American pope for the first time, yeah, it started, and all of what we know and understand and have taught from in terms of eschatology and last day events and America's role in prophecy
Mm-hmm.
standing there beside Rome, you know, it's one of those things that makes your eyes pop and you go. And so when I saw the name that he chose,
Mm-hmm.
I know that popes often are very intentional with their choice of names.
Before you
And
go
so,
into that, let me
yeah,
preface that for the audience,
yeah,
right? Many people aren't aware that I know of that the name the popes choose usually have a meaning. They're not chosen willy nilly. It kind of gives you a preview of to how they're going to govern. That being said, that's what I enjoyed about your article because I didn't do the research. So take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like if I was going to go play basketball, whose jersey am I going to wear? And if I
MJ.
put on that jersey, it's because I think that this guy was, sorry, LeBron, it was Michael. I mean, that's
Amen.
just yeah. Um, so and it's and as you understand the history of how those names are chosen, it's very similar that there are some attribute or some history connected to the name that a current selection of or election of a pope, that pope wants to emulate. That's
Hmm.
typically how that works. And so as I just read a little bit into that, and I found out, I wanted to go and find out what was the history of all of the Leos. So this one is the
Hmm.
ninth. Said what was unique or interesting about the eighth. And then I actually I went all the way back as far as I could go,
Hmm.
and it was just very interesting, and to see how much of um, how much. A matter of fact, the eighth was one of the popes who was serving during the time or lifetime of Ellen White.
Hmm.
So whenever you read Ellen White's statements about the papacy, and I'm not sure if that was the only pope who served during Ellen White's
Yeah.
lifetime,
Hmm.
I
but
think the
but
13th wasn't it
the
Leo the
th-
13th
we
doing
couldn't
Ellen
be at
White's
Leo
life?
the 13th night because we're only at Leo the ninth now,
Yeah.
Okay, I
right?
thought we were on Leo
So
the 14th, but I could be wrong. I'm
Yeah.
probably wrong.
yeah, there may have been another pope that was the 13th during her lifetime, but I,
Hmm.
I I don't think it was Leo. And I mean we can fact check
Yeah.
that
Well, I'm
easy
reading
enough.
your article. If I know my Roman numerals, yeah, the name Leo the 13th is a direct reference to Pope Leo the 13th.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah. So
Because
yeah.
Leo the 10th
Yeah,
was
14th,
Hmm.
yes.
Yes.
particularly brutal pope. I forget
Hmm.
what the time period
Yes.
was, but Leo
Yeah.
10 was one of the
Hmm.
most brutal popes.
Hmm.
Yes. So that's my bad. I'm doing 8 and 9 rather
Yeah.
than 13 and 14. So
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
yeah, superimpose those things there. So yeah, so that was part of the thought process behind writing the article. Really
Hmm.
had to do with the name and the intersection of how popes have traditionally found a place in Adventist eschatology.
Hmm.
I already knew, just because we know this how this works in our particular faith tradition. Whenever there is a new pope, there's always um,
Some
stuff.
hoopla.
There's a
Yeah.
yeah.
Chicken
And I'm
Little
not saying
starts
that it's
calling.
yeah.
So,
Good or
but
bad. I'm
he,
not saying it's
yeah,
bad,
yeah,
but it
yeah,
is what
yeah.
it
I
is.
know, but some sensationalize it beyond what is, and we're going to talk about something else here in a bit. But here's what caught my attention from your article, and because to me in my church, I preach this often, and it doesn't matter the context. I could always try to bring it in. Is the importance of liberty of conscience. And
Yeah.
this particular pope, the one that we are referencing here, said this, right? He said, or had the mindset that liberty of conscience was not merely a civil ideal, it was a spiritual danger. Elaborate on that.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that I think we have always seen emerge from eschatological discussions about Roman Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
From its earliest days, we have seen the emergence now, and I'm saying from the earliest days. And someone could argue, yes, but that was then, not so much now. And even if we want
Mm-hmm.
to take that position, but let's talk about then. So, from its earliest days, the repression of civil, not just civil liberty or not just religious liberty, but
Mm-hmm.
just the freedom of thought and expression, has been a hallmark of what we can look back and see is a characteristic of this particular entity.
Mm-hmm.
From the burning of books, from the burning of people,
Yes.
from that wide of a span. It's like We don't want thought that contradicts or that surpasses or that says anything different than what we would have you to know.
Hmm.
And so that characteristic is something that I think, from the Crusades to the Inquisition, um, we see all of that throughout history. Those of us that learned that period of European history as not just the Middle Ages, but we learned it. Some of the older of us, Joey, we learned it as the Dark Ages, not the Middle
Hmm.
Ages, um, and there was a reason for that.
Hmm.
And most of that reason has to do with the church's repression of freedom of conscience, whether it was in science, whether it was in art, in literature, no matter what sector of society, even politics, and certainly, of course, of religion. But it had just a heavy, heavy hand regarding all of those areas of life. And so when we see a pope say something like what you just quoted, Gio,
Hmm.
it triggers the
Hmm.
reminders of what has been the history of this organization.
Now, granted, the quote or the thought was from the previous pope, back the previous Leo. Obviously, this
Correct.
Leo, correct, I mean, hasn't been around that long. However, like you point out in your article, it's something to keep an eye on. Joey, you were going to jump in here?
Yeah, I was just so that post that you are alluding to, that was the first one that I saw of yours. I think it was a mutual friend shared this, and I read it, and I what I appreciated about it was it was balanced
Yes,
because
that's what I
like
was going to get to next.
a lot of prognostication, and I get why the prognostication exists because I
Sure.
have the same fundamental eschatology, but there's a lot of like speculation whenever anything happens, like you were saying. And I appreciated this because this was balanced. It noted the history and it said like, hey, pay attention to this. But it didn't say like, hey, tomorrow, right? This means that, the Sunday law is coming or whatever. It was very balanced. And one of the things that I'm trying to think exactly how to word this, but one of the things that I appreciated about the balance is that we often we're looking at the things that are signs that are there to tell us that the time is near, but we're looking at those as if those are what Jesus is waiting for. But one thing that I've just become more and more clear is that Jesus isn't waiting on those things. He's waiting on you and me and his people to represent him. And so I just think sometimes I appreciated the clarity, I appreciated the calmness. Um, but I just think, how do we, I guess my question would be, how do we in the church like promote that kind of culture of calm expectation, right? Like watching the signs, but maybe not like if we have a church friend who maybe they get a little paranoid, right? Like how can we bring calm into that environment, or what would be kind of your pastoral advice?
Yeah, I have to admit that I am a bit torn on this particular issue. Um, I wrote a subsequent article that tried to kind of grapple and wrestle with that. I don't remember what it's called, but it had to do about the boy that cried wolf, right?
Hmm.
So we wrestle with that, and again, I hate to say it, but it's some of it is very acute, in terms of in relation to our faith tradition.
Hmm.
Um, However, we know the boy that cried wolf. He cried it too many times. So when the wolf actually came, nobody was prepared, and he got away with the sheep. That's a problem.
Hmm.
I mean, that's dangerous. But what is also dangerous is not responding when there
Mm,
is a wolf and somebody cries wolf. And so there is this delicate balance that we have to find. And so it says, when these things come, don't get so bogged down because you've heard it so many times before and it never happened that you don't pay attention. Also, don't be so trigger ready, finger on the trigger,
Hmm.
so that you fire off before you know what is happening or what is going on. So, yes, Joey, that balance is so particularly important because we are in a position, Christianity and Seventh day Adventism is in a position where we can look really, really, really crazy, or we can look really, really prepared.
So yeah,
Um,
let me jump into that because I haven't seen the movie, but I know about it. It was a movie years ago called Minority Report with Tom Cruise. I never
okay,
saw it, but basically the premise of the movie is that they're hyper vigilant about stopping crime, but they get into the position where they are arresting you for what you will do, right?
got it.
You
Yeah,
haven't done it yet, but they know you're going to do it. And I think sometimes Seventh day Adventists, we jump the gun knowing where the nation is headed, knowing where the union is coming, but sometimes I think we jump it. Whereas we should be watchmen on the towers, but don't blow the horn if it ain't legit, right? Don't cry wolf if it's not legit. And so you got to find that balance because you can't fall asleep either as a watchman,
right.
right? But sometimes I think we accuse things or make comments knowing what they will do, the nation, but it hasn't done it yet. So like find that balance.
Yeah,
Your thought on
and
that?
and I want to say this is the balance is not in being silent. That's not
Mm-hmm.
balance.
Yeah, no,
The
no. Yeah.
balance is not stopping to warn people that the wolf is coming.
Mm-hmm.
We know or we believe that the wolf is coming, that it's on its way, that and we have some prophetic identifiers and characteristics that we are called to point attention to. So the balance is not in being silent and just pretending that there is no wolf or that the wolf is not coming. That is not responsible, a responsible response, and that is not balanced. And I know a lot of people say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, we'll just wait till the wolf is here, and that's not responsible.
Mm-hmm.
Your cry that the wolf is here does nothing to help anybody be prepared for it when it comes. So silence is not an option when it comes to balance. However, being also responsible and saying, here is the information that we have. um, can this be the wolf? It very well
Mm-hmm.
could be, but we're not saying that it is, but pay attention. And I think it's as simple as that. It doesn't have to
Mm-hmm.
be hard and complicated and um, and I think we err oftentimes either to one side or the other, in trying to figure it out. But it can be that simple. It's
Mm-hmm.
coming. We know that it's coming, and we know where it's coming from, at least to some extent. Um, so get ready.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
before we leave this article and go to your second article, what caught you kind of alluded to it, but what caught your attention of the fact that it is the first American Pope, knowing what we know of Revelation 13?
Yeah, just the proximity. So, Revelation 13, you've got the two beasts that are there.
Mm-hmm.
One we have classically and traditionally identified as Rome. And the second beast in the second part of Revelation 13, we have identified, classically as the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first pope that certainly brings those two in the closest proximity that we have
Mm-hmm.
ever seen. Many of our folk are familiar with the Ellen White quote where it talks about, the United States or Protestantism reaching across the Gulf to
Yes.
clasp the hands of the Pope, or Romanism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is the closest thing that we have seen to be to materialize that particular concept. And so
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just what it's, that implication, but
Mm-hmm.
for me it was like we already knew how our folk were going to respond to it. we,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
knew that there was going to be the
Some
hoopla and
hysteria.
the yeah over that. So I just couldn't resist, addressing that because I
Mm-hmm.
knew how we respond to those things. So
Okay. All
Mm.
right. Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing before we jump to the other article. And one thing I think it's important to point out to people is that the image to the beast fully formed, like what it is that America is going to do, right? It's the church-state union, right? The what you were talking about the history of the Dark Ages and how the church, controlled every aspect of society, right? Did not allow freedom of expression, right? Crack down on any theory that it thought challenged its power and these things. That model is going to be back. And while I certainly agree that the American Pope, like I can see how that could lead to that, I could also see, right, that Protestants, that certain groups of Protestants in the U.S. could establish that union without a formal connection. Like they don't have to be like, hey, we're joining the Vatican now, but they're creating this system of the church-state union, which is the image of that Dark Ages church. And so either way, I think, like you said, I think I appreciated the balance and just stuff to keep an eye on.
Well,
Yeah, and
go
Joe,
ahead.
I would just say to that as well that for so long and so often we have kept our eyes specifically on the papacy and Roman Catholicism and the theology and all of that. And the second part, or the second beast in Revelation 13, there is no explicit, if I'm thinking about it correctly, there is no explicit saying where they merge to become one.
Yes.
Which suggests then that the focus on the second beast is on the second beast, not necessarily as you or I'm extracting that a little bit from what you said, that America is the problem in the second in the understanding
they
of the
make
second
the
beast.
image.
Yeah, they're not being compelled or being forced to make the image to the beast from what we read, from what we extrapolate from the text. It's they're doing it, and that sounds very anti-American and all of that. But I mean, it reads how it reads. So
yeah.
Look, I'll just say this.
Go ahead, Joey.
Like, people who would say like, "Oh, you guys are being anti-American."
Yeah,
I would say this. Yeah, sorry. I would say this. Mrs. White actually very clearly says that it's when the nation abandons every principle of the Declaration and the Constitution, that's when it'll have formed the image. So listen, I'll be a patriot to my last breath if being a patriot means standing for the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. It's the nation that is going to, betray all those principles, right? And so the patriots really would be the ones saying, no, we should preserve liberty of conscience. But obviously, it definitely, because it is going to be this nation, people are going to accuse, of disloyalty.
Look, I wasn't planning on doing this, but I'm going to show you a little video because your second article, it's about a 30-second video, was about the second angel in the three angels message, the fall of Babylon. However, there's an accusation made against our tradition. I want you to hear it. Then we'll talk about that, and it'll lead into your second article. Let me put it on the screen here real quick. Let me get you guys on here. It should be popping up here in a second. Like I wasn't planning on doing this. You here? All right, ready?
So does the Seventh-day Adventist Church preach a Christian gospel? And the answer is no, they don't. And how do we know? We look in their own literature. Don't ask an Adventist what they believe. Go to their official sources and see what they're taught to believe. Here in the 28 Beliefs book, on pages 196 to 201, they communicate to their members, who they call the remnant, what is the message you're supposed to preach. And the message they're supposed to preach is something called the three angels' messages. That is not the gospel for the Christian church to preach in the end times. The message of the Christian church is 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4. Because the Adventist church does not preach that message and that message solely, they are twice cursed. And that's according to Galatians 1, 6 through 9. The Adventist church is a cursed church according to the Bible. Stay away from this false church.
So you're hold on, let our guest go first. What's your initial reaction when you listen to that?
Yeah, I'm curious. Joey was chomping at the bits. I'm curious now to hear
All right, go
hear
ahead,
where
Joey.
you were
Then
going to go with
the
that.
guest
I was
allowed
gonna
you to
say,
go.
I love how he said the three angels' messages, like it's some other thing we just got from someone. I was like, no, like that didn't come from Ellen White. That's Revelation 14. Right? Like I
Yeah.
just love how he's like the three angels' messages, like it's something like we just made up. But no, it's in the Bible,
Yeah.
sir.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, people that struggle with the three angels' messages in the way that the gentleman just articulated, it I don't want to be condescending,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yet when you read the first angel's message, and I saw another angel
I'll read it. I'll
flying
read it. Yeah, I'll read it
in
for
the
the
midst of
audience.
heaven.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Like I
Right?
got
It's a,
it.
and here's
We don't need to read it. We having
having
the
the everlasting gospel.
everlasting gospel to preach to
Yes.
them that dwell on the earth, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people.
Yeah.
The essence of the first angel's message, or the opening of the first angel's message, declares that
Mm-hmm.
what we are preaching is the everlasting gospel. And then as that angel begins to continue to speak, and this is where even some of us we wrestle and we struggle, because it then defines what the everlasting gospel is
Mm-hmm.
according to this angel, and as John is seeing it,
Mm-hmm.
saying with a loud voice, fear God and give
Mm-hmm.
glory to him and worship him
Mm-hmm.
who made so
Yeah.
that worship and adoration, and then it finishes, for the hour of his judgment has come. That worship and judgment and all of that is part of what comprises explicitly, according to this angel, the everlasting gospel. So it is. I would love to have that conversation with our friend.
And I like how you pointed out, because it didn't just say to preach the gospel. I love the adjective it used in front of it. It's the everlasting gospel, which we preach, that it's been the same gospel from Genesis to Revelation.
all the way through.
It just changes the way you illustrate it, or the life lessons you use, but it's been the same gospel. And what kills me is he's holding our 28 fundamental beliefs book. Read it. It points you to these,
Yeah.
which that's where we transition, right? Because the first angel is about preaching the everlasting gospel, for the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, and all that. Yet the second angel, which you illustrated in your article, is that Babylon has fallen. What made you write that article that was titled Unsilencing the Second Angel? Thoughts from, our general conference.
Good. And you were talking about getting to the other article, and I wasn't sure which other article you were talking about. So I was like, oh, where are we going? Where are we going? Okay, that's the one.
I
And
thought
I'm
Joey
glad that
gave you a
glad
heads
that you
up.
bring that up. Yeah. Because I think that this issue is the issue for our time, and specifically for our church at this particular time. And it is because, when we talk about the second angel, even within our church,
Mhm.
we do very little. We want to talk about Babylon, and we identify Babylon most of the time as just this hodgepodge of bad theology, just
Mhm.
confusion of bad religion. And yet, if we were to go back and study what Babylon and who Babylon was not seen in its time, in its heyday, as much as a religion as it was a civil power. It was a kingdom, it was an empire. And so this civic nature, this political nature of Babylon, this second angel is coming out, and he is not calling out personal individual sins.
Yeah.
He's
Systems.
calling out the sins of the system, of the empire. And he does it in such a way, Babylon is fallen, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Boom. And then it goes on to the third one. And it's almost as if, yeah, okay, we do that. And we talk about, our tendency has been to point out the individual sins, personal sins that we see in Babylon, right? And we often will compound what we understand Egyptian sins with Babylonian sins. So sexual immorality, so many of the other things that we see in the secularism of Egypt, essentially, we throw them in Babylon. That is correct. That is part of it, because it is this conglomerate confusion of all of these things mixed together. However, if we miss the calling out of the system which the angel is doing, then we find it very convenient to ignore calling out things like systemic racism, systemic oppression of people and people groups, injustice that is happening systemically, as opposed to just an individual's type of a racism versus a system that includes it or that it is built into. And that becomes very messy for us as a church, because we've got, it sounds like we're talking about politics then,
pure politics,
rather than prophecy. And I think this is a hurdle that we've got to find a way to address, because if we only look at Babylon as an issue of personal sins, it gives us a pass to sit back and stay quiet when we see things like institutional racism, we got a large part of the country that doesn't even believe that exists. When we look at the beginning of the third angel's message, and I know there's probably a lot of our audiences who don't like the concept of DEI, but DEI is built into the first angel's message. Every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. There's diversity, there is equity, and there is inclusion in all of that.
And I think the problem with DEI that people have is that, like everything that may be good, some abuse it for the wrong. And so some have trouble separating what it's trying to do with how some people misuse. Like you go back to the riots of the Black Lives Matter. Well, yes, Black Lives Matter. But now we find out that the people who were leading, quote unquote, that movement are enriching themselves with mansions and stuff like that. And so people don't wrestle with what's proper without trying to connect it to the political. Right? You can fight for the thing, but then it becomes partisan because they don't know how to fight it without becoming partisan. And then some people want to then just throw it all away. Know what I'm saying?
Right. And I think it has a lot to do with the worldviews that we arrive with or that we grow up with, some of the biases that sometimes we don't even know that we have, to the media or the voices that we allow ourselves to be fed. All of those shape how we respond to those things. For instance, all of the issues that we can throw at the negatives of Black Lives Matter and the organization and their ancestor worship and their wanting to get rid of the nuclear family and all that kind of stuff. You can find all of those negative things there, but here's the people that choose to point the finger at that will probably never be the same people who will decry capitalism the same way. Because in capitalism, you can go in and find just as many, if not more, negatives to the things that create capitalism, that are part and parcel of it. But we don't decry capitalism that way. So when a person who looks like me, when I look at people you're going to critique the bad parts of Black Lives Matter and say, as Christians, we should have nothing to do with that. And yet at the same time, you're going to uplift and glorify capitalism. I'm like, well, what's missing here? Like, why are you making the distinctions here, and you're not making those same distinctions equitably over here? And you could, capitalism's one. You could
Mm,
find lots of other systems that would be similar. And while it may not be that, and I'll be fair with that,
hmm
it might not be racism, but it sure enough smells a whole lot like it. It looks a whole lot like it. It sounds a whole lot like it. It might not be that, but if you can't articulate why you have these issues with this Black Lives Matter,
hmm
when it has good parts and bad parts, and you can only articulate the good parts of some other system over here,
mm.
and you will not find out the bad parts in there. Why?
Well, it's the
Again,
same thing that
it
happens
makes
in our.
people ask the question,
I,
why?
I'll let you jump in there, Joey. Give me a second though. It's like the same thing that happens with America, right? Like America is great. It's a land of the free, the liberty of conscience. It respects religion and everything. And then too many Adventists say, in one day it'll speak like a dragon. Nah, it's been speaking like a dragon for a long time. You know what I mean?
From the very
And you
beginning.
know, and so that's the thing. I
Gio, you're
think
gonna get us
too
you're gonna get
many
us
people.
canceled, Gio.
Too many people, hold on though. I think too many people don't like living in tension. Look,
Right. Yeah.
it's not black and white in the sense, right, that everything's all negative and everything's all positive. You have to wrestle with the principles. My issue is that when we tie them to partisan politics, right? That's my issue.
Right.
Don't tie it to partisan politics. Then let's deal with with everything that's wrong with the nation, what's wrong with capitalism, what's wrong with, the movement, not Black Lives, the movement, what's wrong with Christian nationalism. You know what I mean? Because there's a point where you can be proud of the nation you live in, but then Christian nationalism, the formal movement, takes it too far. Where I spoke to a Christian nationalist and he's like, yeah, I don't care what religion it is, as long as it's Christianity, I want to enforce it. I was like, you don't see nothing wrong with that? And they were like, no. So that's the thing. And everything that's healthy, I think, is attention, because you have to keep balancing that you don't go on either extreme while fighting for truth. Joey, you were going to jump in, or you're trying to cancel who's ever keep calling you?
No, well, so I wanted to say, so I got a few things I want to say, but the first thing I wanted to say, obviously, before we had Anslem on, he knew we have some disagreements. But the first thing I wanted to say is I really appreciate you coming on, and I know that everyone in this conversation loves Jesus, loves the church, wants to see him coming, and so I appreciate that. Even if we have some disagreements, we can have them in that spirit of we all love Jesus and we want to serve him. So I would say, like, obviously, probably there's like 6 different things that we could probably do a whole episodes on. But I actually, when you were saying about how people can see, the problem, if people can see the problems in BLM, but they can't, and I thought you were going to say with say the MAGA movement or something, and I actually was going to be like, okay, you got a good point, because this is true, right? In the sense that there are a lot of people, and this isn't the same issue, but it's something I saw today that kind of helps me illustrate this. So David French, who's someone who I respect, but he tweeted out a couple of years ago, but then someone who likes dogpiling him brought it up again today, where he had a post where he defended why he had changed his mind on legal gay marriage, right, and how he had been against it and then for it, and he made a point in his post where he said something about how would you feel if what your marriage was taken away by people who are also at the same time defending a serial adulterer and guy who slept with porn stars, right? And how do you feel that? And the point a friend of mine made is about this is like, David is right, and the thing that's making this person who is more of a fan of the MAGA movement, making them upset with him, was what he was right about. Is he was pointing out the hypocrisy of Christians and conservatives who that say they want to stand very strongly for morality in this regard in terms of same-sex marriage, and yet they're having as their champion a guy who disrespects the institution of marriage like a for a profession basically, right? And so that's true. David was right to go to this hypocrisy, but the thing I pointed out is like he's also kind of being a hypocrite in that he's betrayed his principle, right, on this other thing, right, where it's like, but in reality, MAGA is wrong to not hold Trump to the same moral standards that they had, that they say claim to hold Bill Clinton to, and I think rightfully, but they don't hold Trump to. So MAGA's wrong, but also, I would argue that marriage is between a man and a woman, and society has has reasons, for the protection of children, right? But in other words, both sides, right? David French can look at this side and say, well, you guys are hypocrites, but one side's hypocrisy doesn't excuse another side's hypocrisy, if that makes sense. And so I think with what you were saying, right, like that is definitely true. And it's definitely true. Obviously, you brought up like systemic racism or institutional racism. And I definitely think it's true. And obviously we don't have time for it. We could have a whole conversation on this, but it's definitely true, certainly, that systemic racism and the effects of systemic racism is what I think is how I would at least describe it, in that there was legalized, obviously slavery, and then after slavery, right, Jim Crow, and that didn't end all that long ago. And so that was legalized in like systemic racism.
I'll give you an illustration real quick, Joey. A couple of years ago, and now I'm having a brain fart. I'm forgetting. Oh, Ruby Bridges. I preached a sermon, and I showed a picture of Ruby Bridges. And it was a black and white picture. She was a young girl who was escorted by the police into the school. And you could see a crowd of people who didn't like that. And the black and white picture made it sound like, or made it look like it was like 100 years ago. And then I showed a modern picture of her. And I preached this maybe like 8 years ago. At the time, she was only 60. So, in other words, she's still alive. It's still our age. No, it ain't. So it's there. My issue, once again, it's when it's tied to partisan politics, where, as you're saying, they can't see the error on both sides. And that's what I want to avoid as a church, and as me personally.
And I just wanted to say, so I wanted to like draw a differentiation, right? So at least how I understand the word systemic, right, is if there is a law or there is a policy that is racist, right? Well, I want to know about that because I want to change it. But then there's something else where I would say some people, I think, call this systemic racism. I would call it the effects of systemic racism, where there were laws in the past and those laws had an effect at their time. And because the way history works, right, and it wasn't that long ago, they still have an effect, right? Or there is still
residual effect
of those laws, right? But I wouldn't necessarily, at least how I would say it, is I wouldn't call that systemic racism because, well, what do we change? Right? In other words, like if there's a law and that law is racist, well, I want that to be pointed out to me because I want to join the movement to overturn that law. You know what I mean? But I think sometimes when and again, I'm not saying you're doing this, but I think kind of particularly like the cultural moment that happened around 2020. I know I read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, and I think some of that stuff when it goes into okay, well, some systemic racism is this perplexing, like
get to a question, bro. You're rambling.
Okay, I'll just finish it with this point. And in order to stop it, right, and I think there's one point in here, and this is what I found the most disturbing, was the only solution to past discrimination is current discrimination. And to me, that's just continuing a cycle of discrimination. Versus, I actually think, like, what Dr. King advocated for the colorblind society, that should be the goal. That doesn't mean we're there, but that should be the goal. And I know I was long-winded, but I want to get your thoughts on kind of the full spectrum.
Yeah, and I think I could feel where your heart is and where you're going with that. And I'm going to ramble, if you would, a little bit as well
Well,
in
you're
my
our
in my
guest, though. Go
response.
ahead.
Um, it's fascinating to me that there is a section of our culture who thinks of racism as being pro-slavery or pro-segregation, right?
Mm,
And if it is not that, and if there is no legal racism,
mm,
then there can be no racism or no systemic racism. Like I think so. How I would parse, Joey, kind of what you're
mhm,
looking at, what you just articulated for the most part was not systemic racism. You talked about legal racism because you said if there is no law, what do we change?
mhm,
And systemic racism is not only legal racism, it is racism that is a part of the system, even if it is not legal. So you go back to the Civil War. You had plenty of people, soldiers from the North, who fought to preserve the Union and theoretically against slavery, that when the war was over, there was a flood of Northern soldiers, veterans, who went and joined the Ku Klux Klan. Some of the same people who fought to free slaves, it did not disabuse them of white supremacy. So when they went back to their cities and towns in the North, they still would not let Black people in their restaurants, in their stores, in their shops, or marry their daughters, simply because they fought and did not believe that slavery was right, did not mean that white supremacy was
ended.
automatically somehow flushed out of their minds or out of it. So, and I think that we have a certain section in our culture today that if I am against slavery morally, if I think that white supremacy is wrong, if I think that this, that, and the other, that they think that that is enough to mean or to suggest that systemic racism does not still exist. You guys have seen the data. I'm not going to go back through all of that, but you know, you can find things like redlining. You can
Mhm.
find the disparity of Black men and brown men who are accused or convicted of crimes versus the number who are exonerated because they were falsely accused, et cetera, et cetera. You can do all of that stuff, and I know people will debate that back and forth. But I guess what I really want to say is that that issue of finding something that is systemic. There are people who will say there is no systemic racism, or there is no systemic misogyny, or there is no systemic this, that, and the other. Well, I often wonder how do you look at that against some of the data that we see, unless, so I'll say this too, like after Charlie Kirk's murder,
Mhm.
I noticed something in my timeline, in my social media timelines. My social media timeline after Charlie Kirk's murder was inundated with very every left wing argument, debate, people who were debating saying Charlie Kirk was a racist and giving their receipts and all this kind of stuff. But over and over and over and over, it was just this. And I have never noticed my timeline be so skewed to one side at this
So
point. And
you're
I'm saying to
saying
myself,
so you're saying you were just getting the algorithm of saying he was racist?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
That was like my entire timeline. White
Okay.
folk, Black folk, brown folk, celebrity folk, regular
Mm,
folk, just videos and comments and posts about anti Charlie Kirk.
mhm.
And I'm saying, wow, if I'm getting this, if my algorithm is feeding me all of this, then somebody else's algorithm, who the algorithm believes leans a different way, then I suspect they are getting the opposite of this, and there's nothing in between. Um, and I like there's a time where we kind of have to say, yeah, some of the things that positions that we take, and they are highly influenced by the algorithms that are feeding us what they think we want to hear.
Mhm.
And there is a huge danger in that. And I realize that for myself. Like,
Mhm.
I am a person who I do want to hear both sides. I
Mhm.
have no interest in talking exclusively to people who believe and think like I do.
Mhm.
I won't say where, I was in another state preaching for Religious Liberty Day not too long ago. And I preached this sermon on this second angel.
Mhm.
Um, and it was a predominantly black church, pretty much all black church. There was a gentleman who came up to me afterwards who was there. He said, "Man, I'd love for you to come and to preach this at my church, but..." And I said, "You're a member of a state conference church, aren't you?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I don't know if they can handle it." And I said to him, and my initial reaction was, "Yeah, well, I could tone it down, temper it, change my
Yeah.
words amount." But then I said to him, "No." I was like, "I would rather preach that at your church than preach that here. Why? Because everybody here already agreed with me.
Yeah, you're
There,
preaching
there,
to the
there's
choir.
Yeah, I'm preaching to the choir in this point. But for there to be any progress collectively, there must be a point where we can sit down together and have an exchange of ideas that are different if we're going to grow together. We can grow separately, but as we grow separately, we are growing apart, not together.
All right, so let
Um,
me let me ask you a question. You being an African American brother, I'm Hispanic. For those who may not know, I have a permanent tan because I'm always living in the South. um, Here's something that bothers me about my black friends is that sometimes, because most of my black friends are left leaning, when they come across a conservative black person, they start calling them names, man. Uncle Tom and Coon and all this. Like, can we get past the names and just have a conversation? We don't have to agree to, I mean, we can disagree, you know what I mean? And so,
yeah,
why do you think that happens? Because look, and I'm going to talk to you directly, it happens amongst some of our minister friends.
sure, sure.
Know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I can name names. Know what I mean?
One anecdote that I'll add to that. I actually have I have a good friend of mine. He went for his freshman year of political science at Oakwood. He's African American, but like he grew up here in rural Michigan, right? We grew up shooting guns together and all these things. And he left after 1 year, after one. I don't remember if he was there a full semester or if he was there one semester, if he was there a full year. But he left after his first year because he said, I wasn't welcome here. He's like, listen, he's like, I've been African American every day of my life, right? Like, and yet because of my political opinions, I was a pariah, right? I wasn't welcome here. And so to what Gio's saying is just like, that was just one personal example of someone in my life who, I
Yeah.
care about, who experienced that.
Yeah, but Anslem knows pastor friends of ours who comment with that kind of comment. So he knows that I'm not making this up.
Yeah, and so obviously the name calling, as far as name calling, is always going to be problematic,
Mm-hmm.
because simply calling someone a name in most cases
Mm-hmm.
does very little to address the actual issues.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're not arguing an issue. You're not arguing a point. You're just throwing out a platitude or throwing out a name. Um, and there's no discussion that comes out of that.
Mm-hmm.
I would note, however, that name calling, what you said, Coon, and what was the
Uncle
other one,
Tom.
Uncle Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
On a quick side note, I hear it so much that I actually bought the book and I'm reading it.
oh, we lost you for a second. At least
Oh,
on my
sorry.
end, I did.
Oh, sorry. I was saying I hear it so much, the name Uncle Tom, that I finally bought the book and I'm reading it.
Harriet Beecher. Okay.
Just to
Yeah.
find out what's going on here.
Find out who this dude really was. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what also happens is that we begin to create those same type of a terms. Like when I hear people say left leaning or
Mm-hmm.
liberal,
Mm-hmm.
we have started using those terms
Mm-hmm.
in the same way that
Yeah,
people
as a
use.
pejorative. Yep.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So there are people who don't want to engage in any discussion, and so the best they would say is "you liberal" or
Mm-hmm.
"you this, that, and the
Mm-hmm.
other," and we've turned it into that, and that is just as unproductive
Mm-hmm.
and pejorative as some of the others. And again, as Joey mentioned earlier, like two negatives don't make a right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if we're going to call one out, we got to,
Yeah.
call them all out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other part that happens with that is it is natural. It's normal. It's part of the human condition. We get frustrated and
Yes.
angry with somebody who we feel just can't see or doesn't understand or doesn't want to. Then that's just the natural human nature kind of lashing out. We get it. We understand it. And I think we have to get to a place where we recognize that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this is just human nature. Even if this person calls me an Uncle Tom or a coon or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, can I still find a way to to put my feelings aside on that and engage in a
Mm-hmm.
meaningful way? Or is that just too much? Am I
Yeah.
that's a bridge too far and we're just done now? For some people it is, for some people it isn't. I will always say, Gio,
Mm-hmm.
and my members, people that have heard me preach, particularly as of late. This last Sabbath, I was preaching for an international day at somebody else's church, and in my sermon, I said to them, "There is no Adventist who believes this last day message, this prophetic message, who has any business being a Democrat."
You
And it was
said
a
that?
predominant. Oh, absolutely.
Mercy.
And there, and it was
Surprised
a
you still made it
predominantly
to.
black church. And there was what you would expect. There was this awkward silence.
Mm-hmm.
And then I told them, and there is no Seventh day Adventist who believes
Mm-hmm.
this last day message and this prophetic message who has any business being a Republican either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You cannot,
Yeah,
you
yeah. That's why
cannot.
I keep going back to the partisan politics. To
Yeah,
me, the issues when we come, because I'm not against voting, and I think it's a
correct.
private
Yeah.
matter. But to me, the issues are social issues. To me, it's morality, right? Abortion, things like that. The other stuff, look, I don't want to deal with it. You know, and I'm not saying there can't be it's not my calling, is what I'm saying. Others can talk about it, but and maybe it's just because sometimes I read too much on Facebook. I posted something years ago. So some of you are so busy being Democrats and Republicans, you forgot that you're supposed to be Christians first. You know what I mean? And that's the issue that pains me. But I don't say anything. One, because I don't think Facebook is my platform to say anything. And two, it's because, let's be honest, who's ever been really converted to the other side on a Facebook argument?
Yeah.
One
Right?
thing that I will say to your point, as the one studying political science
Yeah.
and right, like kind of going in the opposite direction, but no, but I agree with what you're saying in the sense that, and it's how I came to that realization, right? So I used to be a much more rah rah Republican guy, right? Like I've always been a conservative, but I
Mm-hmm.
used to be much more. And for me, kind of the wake up moment. Now I'm still, my political opinions are basically the same. I'm still a conservative, but for me, a whole host of things related to the current occupant of the White House kind of woke me up. And the final straw for me, as far as like that was concerned, was January 6th, 2021. Right? I just thought that was like there were other things I didn't like. I didn't like the morality, plenty of other things. But January 6th was like and kind of the month leading up to it. That was kind of a breaking point for me. And being on the other side of that, right? Whereas like now it's like I'm still saying all the same political opinions, but because I criticize, this guy or this particular movement, I'm getting people who were like,
Shrapnel
hey,
from
like, hang
everywhere.
out with me. Oh, they're getting shots at me. And like, I had this thing. So I had this post on X that went
Your
like pretty
version of
viral
the
where I talked
yeah,
about my story of why. Sorry.
oh, I'm just saying. So are you saying you're getting your version of Uncle Tom from that side in regards
Well,
to?
I kind of, but what I would say actually happened for me. So I had a post, so for one, there was a bunch of people like they were criticizing things they were saying against Trump, but then I had a post right where I basically told my story about why January 6th was a breaking point, and I listed a bunch of other things, and it went viral. And a friend of mine who's a liberal, he's more left leaning than I am. He like said, I was like, dude, I just saw your post on Blue Sky. Somebody had taken a picture of it, and they were like, oh, thankful that Republicans are waking up or whatever. Well, then I got a bunch of people who started following me, but then I noticed the next day that now I wasn't being attacked from these people. Right? It was because I was posting conservative things. All these people who followed me was like, "Oh, he hates Trump," and then they were like, "Wait a minute, he's still a right wing bigot or whatever they want to say." So it's just like there's no, in other words, to what you're saying about like the spirit of party politics. If your loyalty is to a party, right, you're going to have blind spots to those particular evils.
Absolutely.
Now, one thing that I would say is, I don't know if you're familiar with Justin Giboni. I don't want to mispronounce his name, but Giboni or Justin Giboni from the Just And campaign. Now, he
No.
very famously he identifies as a Christian Democrat. But one thing that I appreciate about him, and this is kind of the tribe that I'm trying to get people to see, is like it's the tribeless tribe, where it's like now he's a Democrat, so he may disagree with me on like certain, the size of government or what welfare policy should be. But the thing that I appreciate about him is like, but he doesn't compromise to go along with the Democratic Party on, say, abortion or LGBTQ issues or these things. And it's very rare. You don't usually see that, but I appreciated that about him. And then he had a post that I don't know if it's still twinned on his thing, where he said basically is like, if you're a conservative, you should be trying to get conservatives to care more about justice and to, care about the poor and the widows, right? You should be pushing conservatives to be better in these things. And if you're a progressive, you should be urging progressives to care about morality and to care about, law and order and all these other things, right? It's like, and it's this kind of balance where if you have that spirit of, I'm not loyal to the elephant or to the donkey, but to the cross.
To the lamb.
And
Keep the
To the
analogy
lamb,
right.
to the lamb, to the lamb. Yeah.
Hey, look, I don't want to take more of your time here. We had said an hour, but I do want to talk about where do you see, based on your Babylon article, where do you see, because, you had mentioned earlier on the green room, some people, I don't know if we should mention names, but, bashing like things like 3ABN and Doug Batcher and all that. How do we come together? Because look, I just had an international Sabbath at my church, and the compliment that we got the most, because I'm the pastor, I didn't lead it out, but I was obviously front and center, was someone said to me, racism is so stupid because we just got a glimpse of what heaven will be like in our church. Because we had a parade of nations, we had people singing Amazing Grace in Swahili. You know what I mean? We had Portuguese reading, and we had different, eventually we have to unite, even if it's not under the umbrella of the formal church, but as brothers and sisters. How do we get past this?
Yeah, if I can, I want to speak explicitly to two things. One, our church is. I'm going to mention this, and then I'm going to come back to it. Our church is unique in that our structure provides for some separation, right? That's already a thing.
Yeah.
So hold a pin there, and I want to come back to that. I want to dip back real quick into something that we have been talking about in terms of the difference between left and right, the partisan politics. and the support for things like LGBTQ and abortion.
Mhm.
And I think there is a part of this that I never hear really addressed. But I know that if I take a position that I will vote to allow LGBTQ marriages
Mhm.
and to allow abortions, our choices are either to, it seems to either vote to allow it or to vote to prohibit it,
Mhm.
right? Those are the choices that we have, to either vote to allow it or to prohibit it. If I am voting to prohibit things that go against my moral compass, which is undergirded by my biblical Christianity,
Mhm.
then if I am voting to prohibit it, I am voting to restrict somebody else's moral compass.
Mhm.
And by that way, it becomes an issue of threatening liberty of conscience.
Mhm.
There are those who will say, but if I vote to allow it, then therefore you support it. And that's frankly not true. It's categorically not true. I can allow my child in my home to go and get a tattoo or to buy a dress that I don't like. But just because I allow them to do it does not mean that I think it is right or I think it should be done. Now, that I gave a home example.
Mhm.
In my home, there's a thing where, yeah, I govern that. That's my home. I'm the priest of the home, this, that, and the
Mhm.
other. And I ought to be able to do that. But not so in a civil, secular society.
Mhm.
When I vote to allow somebody to make a moral choice that I do not agree with, it doesn't, or to make a moral choice that is different than mine, it doesn't mean that I agree with it or that I support it. It means that
Mhm.
I believe in their free moral choice to do it. And I do not believe that I have the right or the authority to force or impose my moral compass on somebody else. If I did, I believe that breaking the Sabbath is immoral. Yes, we all agree with that.
Yeah.
The Sabbath
Yeah.
commandment is part
Mhm.
of the moral law. If I believe that it is immoral for someone to break the seventh day Sabbath, and I think that everybody needs to do it, then if I'm being consistent, the same way that I think that I do believe that homosexuality is a moral sin, I believe that abortion is a moral sin and wrong in most of its cases. You know, we can
Mm.
always
Yeah.
do all of that,
Nuances.
life of the mother, all of that stuff. But if I want to be consistent with that position, that I want to make it illegal for anybody to commit a moral sin, then I place myself in the position, if I'm going to be consistent, of saying I should also support a law that says it is illegal for you to break the seventh day Sabbath.
I think we're
That's not
going
who
to
we are.
agree to disagree there. But that'll
I
be
would
Yes.
for
say,
a different episode if you're willing to come
Yeah.
back. Because,
Yes. Yes. Let's.
yeah,
I know that that's
yeah,
the thing. Again. Okay.
yeah.
So let me go back to the other one because I do know
Okay.
that's a can that we
Yeah.
won't have time to do with. Um. So what was that? What was the first one? What did I say the first
The
time?
first can was about, oh, hold on.
I'm
Oh,
glad we found something that we could very directly disagree on.
yeah, yeah. Because, yeah, but I don't want to get into it because no, but basically, let me give you the short
Yes.
synopsis. I think we can separate the first four commandments from the last six. And I think Romans 13 allows us to do that. And so going back to the tension, it's a tension, it's a delicate balance between Romans 13 and Revelation 13, right? The government
Yeah.
is allowed because we legislate murder. You can't murder.
Yeah. I'm
And I'm
not
talking
gonna. I'm
about
not
forget
gonna.
abortion. I'm
Yeah.
talking about just you
Yeah.
and I. I can't murder you. You can't murder
Yeah.
me. Forget abortion. So we can get into that. But this is what I like about you, and I've always respected about you. You can come on here, express your opinion. I could disagree, and we could still keep it civil.
Sure, absolutely.
I've always respected
Yeah.
that about you because I used to watch your program, which is why I asked, if it's still going on. Know what I mean? And so, yeah, and so it was going back to
Conference.
how
I was
can
going to, I was,
how we can
yeah, good.
yeah, go ahead.
That-
I'll give you the last word on
brought
that.
us back to that.
Yeah.
So I am, and I take flack from this from many in my own community, in the Black church. I am that guy who feels that I don't think that the state versus regional conference structure is helpful or is a goodness. I understand it. I get it. I'm a part of it. There are certain levels on which I can defend it. But I would rather see us together. I would rather see our churches look like what we expect heaven is going to look like. I tell my members, when is the last time you invited somebody who doesn't look like you to sit at your dinner table in your home? When is the last time you stopped and had a conversation with a police officer? Those are things that I think that we need to be much more intentional about pursuing than we have been to this point. I get why our sister was frustrated and posed the issue or the question on maybe boycotting some of our periodicals and publications that seem like they don't care about us. And I know we don't have the time to do it, but I get that, and I can explain it and defend it to a point. Do I agree with it overall? No, we want to come together. We want to be, the John 17 church, that they might be one. That's ultimately what I would love to see. Do I think that there have been some unfair things going back and forth? Yes, absolutely. How do
like
we
we pointed
there?
out earlier, the Danny Shelton thing, know what I mean? That he caught
Okay.
shrapnel and he wasn't even, know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it goes
yeah,
both ways, know what I mean? I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
I talked to Danny at some length about that, and I shared with him part of his issue was he caught flack due to proximity. And the Wisdom Pearl thing that had taken place earlier in the year.
In Arizona.
That's how he ended up in that conversation.
Okay,
and because I hadn't seen the statement from him or 3ABN post Charlie Kirk's death. And I asked him point blank, did you make one or did 3ABN? No, he said, no, we hadn't said anything. So the reason that he ended up in the crosshairs had to be connected to the Wisdom Pearl, where he was on the stage with the young man. So was it fair?
Well,
yeah.
Well,
how it was couched and how it was framed, not necessarily in that context, but in the wider context, I understood why he ended up in those crosshairs.
well,
It's
brother,
still not fair. I'm just saying I understood it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, and that's the thing. That's the thing. We need to seek understanding whether we think it's right or wrong, or whether we think it was fair or not. Seek understanding, because that's, in Spanish, my mom always had a phrase, hablando se entiende. When you talk it out, you understand each other, right? But if we're going to stay on either side of the aisle, what are we doing? We need to talk. Joey, one last thing, because I'm already overtime. I moved this show from 8 my time to 7 so I can get to bed early. I got to wake up at like 4. Go ahead.
I'll just end it because it kind of, I think it goes to your last question about how do we achieve unity? And it also ties back in to our beginning of the conversation where we talked about how when there's a lot of events happening, our people can sometimes be a little conspiratorial or maybe a little paranoid sometimes for for understandable reasons, but I think it's helpful, and I think this is how we get unity, and I think this is also how we get rid of some of the paranoia, is that we remember that ultimately what we're trying to do when we want reconciliation, between Black Christians and white Christians and Hispanic Christians, we want between conservatives and liberal Christians, we want unity, when we want to be ready for Jesus' soon coming, we want to be this. Christ is waiting. This is from Counsels to Parents, Teachers, and Students. Christ is waiting with longing desire for the manifestation of himself in his church. When the character of the Savior shall be perfectly reproduced in his people, then he will come to claim them as his own. It is the privilege of every Christian not only to look for, but to hasten the coming of our Lord. Were all who profess his name bearing fruit to his glory, how quickly the whole world would be sown with the seed of the gospel. Quickly the last great harvest would be ripened and Christ would come. So when we want unity, when we want all these other things, we're not going to be able to do it. We're not going to be able to get this kind of righteousness on our own. We're not going to be able to overcome our sins on our own. We're going to be whether that's racism, whether that's, the mistreatment of, my friend James, right? Or whatever the sin is. We can't overcome it. We can't overcome prejudice or anything on our own, but Christ can do it, right? And ultimately we want, right, all of us, right, is the righteousness of Christ. And I think when we keep our eye on that, it's not going to mean we still have to have the conversations, but we've got that North Star that we know that we're heading in the right direction.
Brother, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I think one of the things too that has to be grappled with is that if I feel like, or if it seems like you are supporting an idea, a policy, or a person who is against me, I can't trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I believe that a Charlie Kirk or a whoever it else is that is racist and this is that and the other, and you are lauding him, even when you are saying, yes, let's come together, when I know all of the things or believe, even if I'm mistaken about it, if I believe these things about the one that you are lifting up, then it says, there's no room for me to be united with you because you are coming with a bias or a thing against me to begin with. And until we are ready to wrestle with those things, the kumbaya, let's come together, let's have unity, the John 17, all of those things, we have to sit at tables like this, like what we're doing now. And we have to be able to talk through, like, was it your mother, your grandmother? Your mother said,
yeah, my mother, yeah.
Your mother, we have to be willing to do that in order to get to the kumbaya, because there are people that have to recognize that we can say all of those things that we want to say, and they sound nice and they sound biblical and this, that, and the other. But there's a level of trust that I cannot have in you if I believe that you are supporting some ideology, some individual who has blatantly marked me off as being undervalued or insignificant or unimportant. And that becomes part of the inhibitor that we've got to figure out.
Yeah.
Whether it's right or wrong, as far as the assumptions, we got to figure that part out before we can get to
it. Yeah, we got to navigate that. Do you write on Substack or anything you want to promote before we let you go?
I have just started doing some stuff on Substack. I don't remember what my name or whatever is. I'll send it to you if you want to put it in your notes or something in the thing. Right now, I've just been moving stuff that I've written on Facebook over there. I don't have any fresh stuff, but just to make it all in, because I write long stuff.
Yeah. Hey, it's good. All
Well, I
right, until
appreciate it.
next time on the Gio and Joey show, Anslem, thank you very much. Hang on when it goes black a little, and we are done. Good night, everyone.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you for having me.